I was 70 years old when I spent Christmas Eve sitting alone in a small apartment in Brooklyn, eating a microwaved TV dinner that had already gone cold by the time I peeled back the plastic film. It was turkey and gravy, how fitting. The meat was rubbery and the cranberry sauce had bled into the stuffing like a crime scene. I chewed slowly, more out of duty than hunger, while the window behind me reflected the soft flicker of red and green string lights from across the street, other people's joy leaking faintly into my solitude. I didn't expect visitors. I didn't expect a knock on the door, a cheerful carol, or even a phone call. My phone sat face up on the kitchen counter, as silent as a coffin. A few spam emails, no texts, not even a seasonal e-card. My son Brandon Mason hadn't called on Thanksgiving either, or my birthday. But tonight he did post something. I saw it the moment I mindlessly opened Instagram, half from boredom, half from muscle memory. There he was, my only child, laughing on the deck of a luxury overwater villa in the Maldives. Shirt open, champagne bottle in hand, a woman I didn't recognize clinging to his side in a red bikini. "Merry Christmas from Paradise," the caption read. A few fire emojis, a dozen comments from people congratulating his hard-earned success. And there it was, my money paying for his view. My years of sacrifice funding his oblivion. He hadn't earned any of it. I stared at that picture longer than I'd like to admit. I didn't blink. I just let my eyes burn. I zoomed in. Because of course I did. I zoomed in on the background, the table set with lobster tails and gold-rimmed flutes. A watch glinting on his wrist. I gave him that watch on his 30th birthday. He said he lost it 2 years ago when he accidentally dropped it down the sink. I didn't cry. My eyes were too dry for that. But my chest clenched in that quiet, familiar way. The kind of pain that doesn't need to shout because it's already claimed the land. It lives here. I put down the phone and walked slowly into the bedroom. My knees creaked and the linoleum floor was ice cold. The radiator, as always, gave more groans than heat. In the corner was my old safe, just a small gray box hidden behind a folding chair, and a stack of outdated Christmas wrapping paper I hadn't touched in 3 years. The combination came back to me instantly. Muscle memory again. I opened the safe and pulled out a faded blue folder. Inside was every document that ever mattered, my nursing pension statements. Brandon's old student loan receipts, all paid by me, the deed to the house I sold when he convinced me to downsize for comfort. Comfort, my ass. He needed liquid cash for his first investment project, which failed 6 months later. He never paid me back. He said I'd helped him learn. I sat on the edge of the bed with that folder on my lap and stared at the neat rows of numbers. I was no accountant, but I knew the truth. I had less than 3 years left at this rate. And that was if I didn't get sick. God help me if the cancer came back. Then something in me shifted. Not snapped. Shifted like an old tectonic plate realigning after too many years of silence. I stood up calmly and walked back to the kitchen. I dumped the rest of the turkey dinner in the trash. The cranberry sauce dripped down the sides of the garbage like it was bleeding. I poured myself a glass of water and sat at the small wooden table I'd bought when Brandon was 5. He used to do homework here. I remembered how he'd scribble on napkins when he ran out of paper. That boy was brilliant once. Sweet. Before the charm turned to manipulation. I looked around the apartment. There was nothing left of me here except the walls, and maybe the rust stain under the sink. So I made a decision. A strange kind of clarity settled in like a curtain being drawn back after years of murky glass. I stood up again and reached for the cordless phone hanging on the wall, still connected, still functional, mostly because I couldn't stand the silence. I dialed a number I hadn't called in years. Lewis Knight speaking, the voice answered. Older now, rougher. "It's Eleanor Mason," I said, my voice steady. A pause, then Ellie. "God, it's been, 12 years? 14. You okay?" I didn't respond right away. I walked to the window and looked out at the snow beginning to fall. Light flurries drifting like second chances. "I want to update my will," I said. "And I want to challenge a fraudulent real estate transfer." Another pause, then "You want to meet in person?" I smiled, for the first time in a long time. "Yes, I think it's time I stopped letting him write the ending to my story." And just like that, it began. Because what Brandon didn't know was this: I still had the original deed. The one with my signature only. And the power of attorney he filed. That wasn't mine. I had proof. But I wasn't going to use it from a dusty apartment over cold turkey. I was going to stand on a stage with cameras, with evidence, with names and dates, and tell the world what kind of man Brandon Mason really was. But first, I needed to disappear for a while, just long enough for him to feel safe. Long enough to set the trap. Long enough to make him believe his mother had finally given up. He wouldn't see it coming. None of them would. And when I returned, it wouldn't be in silence. I met Lewis the next morning at a cafe on Atlantic Avenue. It was the kind of place where the coffee always smelled burnt, The vinyl booth stuck to your coat, and no one looked you in the eye unless you owed them something. Perfect for what I needed, low profile, untraceable. He looked older, of course. We both did. His once jet black hair had surrendered to gray, and there was a slight limp in his step that wasn't there when we used to bump into each other at the courthouse. Still, his eyes were the same sharp, unblinking, suspicious of easy answers. Still drink it black, he asked. Sliding into the booth across from me, his briefcase thunked against the seat like it held secrets. I nodded, strong enough to burn through grief, guilt, and gallstones. He gave me that dry half-smile I remembered. So, what's the real story, Eleanor? Why not? I pulled a manila envelope from my purse, creased from age but sealed with deliberate precision. Inside were copies of bank transfers, notarized letters, and the real deed to my apartment. The one Brandon had supposedly helped me transfer for convenience 2 years ago. Only I never signed the second page. Someone else had, and I had the handwriting analysis to prove it. Lewis flipped through the pages with a lawyer's detachment until he landed on the scanned copy of the forged power of attorney. His brow tightened. That's not your signature, he muttered. Not even close. No, I said calmly, stirring my coffee. It's Rachel's. She forged it, I'm sure of it. Rachel Mason. My daughter-in-law. Or as she called herself online, Real Estate Queen NYC. All big lashes and bigger ambitions. When Brandon married her, I tried to keep an open mind. She brought him structure polish, but she also brought leverage and quiet suggestions about how I should simplify my life. After their wedding, she started managing all the paperwork. She called it relieving my burden. I called it theft with a smile. Lewis leaned back, crossing his arms. You could press charges. I don't want jail, I said, eyes fixed on the streaked window. I want exposure. I want him to be who he really is in front of all his investors, his fans, his followers. Let them see. He raised an eyebrow. So a public reveal. Yes, I said, heart steady, but not yet. I want to see how far they'll go when they think I'm out of the way. He tapped a pen against the folder, thinking. That's risky. So is raising a son alone for 30 years and ending up in a one-bedroom apartment while he drinks crystal in a place that costs more per night than my monthly rent, I replied. Lewis didn't argue. Over the next few days, I disappeared. Not literally, but socially. I stopped answering calls. I deleted the comments I left under Brandon's posts. I unsubscribed from his newsletter. I wanted them to think I had finally retreated, folded like a tired hand at the end of a losing game. That's what people like Brandon count on. They think silence is surrender. It isn't. Sometimes silence is a loaded gun waiting for the right moment. Meanwhile, Lewis helped me build the case quietly. We gathered financial statements, tax records, and even accessed Rachel's real estate license filings. She'd used my name to co-sign on 2 properties I'd never seen. One of them in Delaware, another in Miami. She'd signed as my authorized representative, all with that same forged loop in the E. I didn't just feel violated, I felt foolish. I remembered how she used to bring me herbal teas telling me they'd help my joints, how she'd laugh and say, "You're family now, Mom." It was all part of the play. Make the mark feel valued, then gut them blind. Still, not everything in those years had been empty. There were nights I remembered holding Brandon when he had night terrors. Times I skipped meals so he could have enough for school lunches. His voice at 10 reading me birthday cards in crayon. Where had that boy gone, or worse, had he ever really been there? One afternoon, while filing a quiet injunction with Lewis, I got a ping from Jenna, an old friend of mine who worked part-time at a tax prep office in Queens. She didn't know the full story, just that I'd been dealing with family headaches. She'd forwarded me an email from a mutual contact, someone she'd met during a real estate seminar. It was a copy of an invitation, Brandon Mason Presents Building Empires, a masterclass in ethical wealth, scheduled for January 18th, at a private ballroom in Washington, D.C. Open bar. Press allowed, live streamed. I nearly choked on my tea. Ethical wealth. My spine stiffened. That was it. That was where I'd strike. We started planning. Lewis contacted a journalist he trusted from the Times, a woman named Elise Liu who'd reported on elder financial abuse before. She wasn't just interested, she was furious. She asked for documentation. I gave her a USB drive. She asked for statements. I handed her boxes. But I wasn't just prepping behind the scenes. I was performing. I began acting more frail than I was. At the pharmacy, I asked for help reaching vitamins. At the building lobby, I let the concierge assume I was slipping mentally. I wanted the rumors to start. I wanted Rachel and Brandon to hear I wasn't well, that I might be declining. It was all fuel for their arrogance. And then one night, about 3 weeks before the event, I got a knock on the door. It was Harold, my upstairs neighbor. Vietnam vet. Old school, courteous, the kind of man who still wore slacks to buy groceries. Got a package delivered to me by mistake, he said, handing over a box. His eyes lingered. You all right, Ellie? You've been quiet. I paused. I could lie, or I could let him in. "Come in for tea," I said. We sat for an hour while I told him everything. When I finished, he didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a business card worn at the corners. "My niece," he said. "She works with Adult Protective Services, just in case." I stared at the card. Something in me trembled, not out of fear but relief. I wasn't alone anymore. I'd built my life on being strong, being useful. But now I had to be something else, strategic. I thanked him, and as he left, he turned and said, "Whatever you do, Ellie, make it loud." I closed the door and looked at the invitation to Brandon's event one more time. Gold foil letters, a smiling headshot of my son in a tailored suit. That's when the thought struck me I wouldn't just crash the party. I'd take the microphone. January in DC is a cold that seeps into your bones and curls around your joints like regret. I arrived at Union Station 2 days before the event, dragging a modest suitcase behind me and wearing a coat older than Brandon's first company. I didn't book a hotel. Instead, I stayed at a small boarding house off U Street, run by a widow named Agnes, who still listened to jazz on a turntable and served coffee strong enough to strip paint. She didn't ask many questions. I liked that. My plan had to be precise. Brandon's masterclass wasn't just a networking event, it was a performance. He'd rented the Hamilton Live ballroom, decked it in navy and gold, and arranged a speaking panel that made him look like the second coming of Warren Buffett. The website claimed attendees would learn wealth with conscience. Irony, it seemed, had no expiration date. Lewis had secured press passes for Elise Liu and a videographer from her paper. Their job was simple: record everything, but stay invisible until I gave the signal. Harold's niece from Adult Protective Services, Dana, was also there disguised as an assistant to Elise, but with authority to escalate if needed. I wasn't planning a private revenge. I was building a reckoning. The morning of the event, I stood in front of the mirror in Agnes's spare bedroom. I wore a dark green dress with a brooch shaped like a tree, my mother's. The roots curled into a spiral, and I pressed my thumb into them for luck. I hadn't worn makeup in years, but I applied just enough to remind myself that I still recognized the woman in the glass. Not a victim, not a relic, a storm in pearls. The ballroom was full by the time I arrived. I entered through the service hallway escorted by a friendly temp named Kayla, who thought I was delivering programs. Bless her. The energy in the room buzzed with money and aspiration. Everyone was dressed like they'd just walked out of a Forbes shoot. Brandon stood center stage, tailored suit hair, immaculate voice booming into a wireless mic. Success, he said, is about legacy. It's about what you build for the next generation. The words burned. I watched the crowd nod, unaware that the man before them had bulldozed his own mother's future to get here. Behind the bar, Rachel sipped a mimosa and laughed with a venture capitalist in suede loafers. Her nails were painted blood red. I waited, I watched, I listened. Brandon unveiled graphs of projected ROI from his fake investment firm, threw around terms like pass-through trusts and collateralized wealth models. At one point, he even said, "My mother always taught me the value of hard work." I almost choked. Then came the segment labeled Legacy Reflections. That was my cue. I moved through the side aisle, passing rows of leather shoes and diamond earrings. A few heads turned. Most didn't. Why would they notice a gray-haired woman in flats? I climbed the steps at stage right, calm as water. The moderator, some poor intern from his firm, looked up in confusion. I smiled gently and whispered, "I have something to say about legacy." Then I took the mic. Brandon froze. Rachel's eyes narrowed. I could see Lewis at the back, arms crossed, nodding once. "Good afternoon," I said, voice steady. "My name is Eleanor Mason. I'm Brandon's mother." A murmur passed through the room like wind through brittle trees. Brandon stepped forward, plastering on his "mom don't embarrass me" smile. "Mom, maybe we can talk?" I turned away from him and addressed the crowd. He's right about one thing. Legacy matters. And this young man built his entire fortune on the back of mine. I sold my family's home to fund his first company. I signed over my apartment under the pretense of protection. I trusted him. And in return, he used forged documents signed by his wife to steal everything I had. Gasps, real unfiltered shock, the kind you only hear when the air in a room changes. Rachel stood up, trying to walk out. Dana blocked her. Elise lifted her camera. I pulled the folder from my handbag and held it high. These are the original deeds. Bank statements, emails, handwriting analysis. This is what your mentor built his empire on. Brandon's face drained of color. "Mom, this isn't the time?" It's exactly the time I snapped, years of silence snapping like dry branches. You used me, then erased me. I ate cold dinners while you posed with champagne, but I am not gone. I am not dead. I am standing right here and I am reclaiming my voice. The room was silent. Even the jazz playlist had stopped. Then someone clapped, just one person, then two, then 10. I turned to Brandon. You always said I was too sentimental, too soft, but softness isn't weakness. You'll learn that soon. I handed the mic back to the moderator who stood like a statue, unsure what to do next. As I walked off stage, Elise slipped me a small nod. Dana followed Rachel out, phone in hand. And Lewis, he was smiling. Not with smugness, but with relief. But as I passed the final row of seats, something caught my eye. A man in a gray blazer, early 30s, tense jaw eyes locked on me. He wasn't clapping, he wasn't moving. Later, I would learn his name was Carter Wynn, Brandon's silent partner, and the man who'd been funding the real estate shell companies overseas. He stood up, reached for his phone, and that's when I knew this wasn't over. Not even close. The next morning, my name was in the headlines. Mother exposes son's fraud at wealth seminar, Brooklyn widow reveals family betrayal live on stage. From nurse to whistleblower, Eleanor Mason's fight for justice. Elise's article ran with a photo of me gripping the microphone mid-sentence, eyes sharp, spine straight. Not a victim, not broken, not anymore. But underneath all the attention, beneath the hundreds of supportive comments, interview requests, and people offering to share their stories too, was something colder. Something quiet. A legal silence from Brandon and Rachel. Not a word, not a single public denial, which meant only one thing: they were circling the wagons. And that man in the gray blazer, Carter Wynn, wasn't just some guest. Within 48 hours, Lewis dug up a connection. Carter had registered 3 LLCs in Florida, all linked to shell properties Brandon supposedly advised on. All signed under a trust bearing my name. A name I never gave permission to use. Lewis showed me the paperwork with an expression that mixed admiration and fury. They weren't just stealing from you, he said. They were laundering it through you. For the next week, the spotlight stayed on me. I got messages from elder abuse support groups, invitations from morning shows, even a call from the AARP asking if I'd consider doing an awareness campaign. But I said no to all of it, not yet, because there was still more they hadn't shown. Brandon had hidden things not just from me, but from the IRS, the state licensing board, and the public. And I wasn't about to stop at a microphone. Meanwhile, Rachel had vanished from social media. All her photos were gone. Her real estate accounts went private. I wasn't surprised. She was always good at cleaning up fast. She knew the drill. Her father had been arrested in '98 for wire fraud. I remembered that only because she once told me over dinner, laughing, "We learn early how not to leave trails." But Brandon, he kept the facade. Posted a black and white photo of himself looking somber with a caption, "Every story has layers." Mine's no different. Thank you for those who still believe. 1,000 likes. Dozens of sycophantic "Stay strong, bro" comments. I felt sick. That's when Harold knocked again. He had a manila envelope in his hand stamped anonymously. No return address. Inside 10 color printouts. Screenshots of text conversations between Brandon and Carter. Property deals, fake paperwork, and one chilling exchange. Brandon. The old bat doesn't even check her mail. Carter, cool. Just send me another form with her signature. Use the same one Rachel scanned last time. Brandon. She's practically a ghost. By the time she notices, we'll be offshore. I read the lines 3 times, the blood draining from my fingers. Harold watched me. I didn't want to open it, he said. But it was slid under my door by mistake. Maybe someone knew I'd get it to you. Someone on the inside, someone with a conscience. That night I called Dana. She forwarded the text to her contacts at the federal level. This just moved from elder fraud to conspiracy, she said. Let me make a few calls. By morning, the Department of Financial Services had frozen 2 accounts tied to the shell companies. Brandon's team tried to fight it, claiming retaliation from a disgruntled family member. But the paper trail was too thick now. Elise published a second article. This time, it included Brandon's text messages. Still, there was one thing missing. The smoking gun. Proof that Brandon knew from the beginning that what he was doing was illegal, not just careless or entitled, but calculated. Lewis had a theory. Follow the original signature file, he said. The one Rachel used to forge your name. That scan had to come from somewhere. A printer, a cloud account, maybe even a forgotten email. So I searched. Not just my emails, but Brandon's old devices, the ones I had boxed up after he upgraded and left them behind. I still had his MacBook from college tucked away in the hallway closet. It was slow, needed 3 tries to boot, but once it did, it was a treasure chest. In a folder marked Admin Docs, I found a PDF labeled E. Watt Mason Master. Dated 3 years ago. A high-resolution scan of my driver's license signature page from my mortgage contract and even a notarized blank template. Rachel's email address was in the metadata. I forwarded everything to Lewis and Dana. Then I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where I once taught Brandon to spell inheritance for a 5th grade project, and cried for exactly 90 seconds. Not from sadness, from rage. That afternoon, Dana called. "This is enough to request criminal charges," she said. "Do you want to go that far?" I looked out the window. Snow was falling again, this time thicker. Somewhere kids were building snowmen. In some parallel life, I'd be sipping cocoa with a son who called me on Christmas. But this life, this one needed accountability. "Yes," I said, "all the way." She hesitated. "There's one more thing. The federal office wants to know if you'd be willing to testify before the Financial Misconduct Committee." Brandon's name came up in another case. Offshore investments, fake trusts. He may not be working alone. I didn't blink, set the date. But just as I hung up, my phone buzzed again. A blocked number. Against my better judgment, I answered. A deep voice distorted slightly. "You've made yourself loud, Eleanor. Some of us prefer silence." Click. I sat frozen in my kitchen chair, staring at the phone in my hand long after the call had ended. The voice, deep, calculated, slightly warped, reverberated through my bones. Some of us prefer silence. Not a threat exactly, but not far from it either. My first instinct was to dial Dana or Lewis or even Harold upstairs. But then I stopped myself. No, this wasn't fear. This was pushback. Which meant we were finally hitting nerves that mattered. Still, I double-locked my door that night. I left the hallway light on. I slid a chair under the knob like I hadn't done since I lived alone with toddler Brandon in a walk-up in Bed-Stuy when every creak in the floorboards sounded like danger. And just like then, I didn't sleep. By morning, I made my choice, no more second-guessing. I called Dana and told her everything about the call. She took it seriously. We've seen this before, intimidation attempts through proxies. Carter Wynn has been investigated for tampering before, but nothing's stuck. Yet. She offered protective surveillance, but I declined. Not because I didn't believe the risk, but because I wouldn't be pushed back into silence. Not now, not again. That afternoon, Elise showed up with a young woman named Adriana, her digital forensics expert. I let them comb through Brandon's old laptop, and within the hour, Adriana found something even Lewis had missed: a hidden folder of encrypted PDFs buried under a rename of a system app. Inside, copies of bank statements from a Cayman Islands trust tied to a company called Skyward Holdings. The listed beneficiary, E. Mason Estate. That was me, again. That was me. But one file stopped us cold. It was a notarized transfer of ownership listing the buyer of a Miami property as Brandon Mason trustee, but the seller's signature had been lifted pixel for pixel from a photo of my driver's license. A digital copy-paste forgery. It was bold, lazy, and criminal. Adriana looked at me gently. "Mrs. Mason, this kind of fraud, it's organized. It's bigger than just your son." Lewis joined us via Zoom, face stern. "I'll be submitting this to the federal case file, but Eleanor, you should know, this means testifying won't just be about Brandon. It may involve facing corporate attorneys, federal agents, possibly cross-examination in a courtroom full of press." I nodded. I don't need a warm room, I need the truth to have heat. Later that night, while I was sorting through a file box, a memory surfaced I hadn't visited in years. Brandon was 17. He'd forged my signature on a field trip permission slip after I said no. I found out when the school called to confirm his absence. When I confronted him, he laughed. Said I knew you'd say no and I didn't want to deal with it. It felt small at the time, just teenage boldness. But now I saw the seed. The hearing was set for late February, 2 weeks away. A special committee would convene in Washington to investigate fraudulent financial practices involving elder abuse and trust misrepresentation. My name was on the witness list, and so was Brandon's. In the days leading up to it, small things started happening. Emails mysteriously missing from my inbox. My building's mail slot pried open. A strange man in a black beanie loitering near the corner every evening, always smoking, never speaking. I reported it. Dana kept the feds in the loop. But I felt it all the same, the sensation that something invisible was tightening around me. And then the most unexpected thing of all happened. I received a letter. Not an email, not a typed-out legal memo. A handwritten letter. No return address. Just my name. Inside was a single page written in Brandon's handwriting. "Mom, I know you hate me, but there are things you don't understand. I wasn't the one who started this. Carter found the loopholes. Rachel went behind my back more than you think. I made mistakes. But please don't destroy everything. You won't survive the fallout either." I stared at it for a long time, unsure what part made my stomach twist more. His attempt at sympathy or the subtle threat. "You won't survive the fallout." Was that concern or warning? I scanned the handwriting. Sloppy, unlike Brandon's usual precision. Maybe rushed, maybe scared. I didn't know whether to believe any of it, but I filed it away, another piece of the puzzle. Then came the call from Dana, there's been a breach. What kind of breach? One of the key witnesses, an accountant tied to Skyward Holdings, was found unconscious in his apartment. No forced entry, we think it was staged. I felt a chill claw down my spine. Is he alive? Barely, but he's out of the case for now, which makes your testimony more important than ever. I hung up. My hands were shaking, not with fear, with fury. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was a system built on exploiting silence buried in loopholes and signed in ink stolen from the vulnerable. I wouldn't be silent. I wouldn't let the wind blow dirt over what they buried. So I did the only thing I knew how to do. I sat at my desk. I opened my old spiral notebook, the one I used when I was still working shifts at the hospital. I began writing my testimony, line by line, truth by truth. No embellishments, just facts, just consequences. But as I scribbled, my phone buzzed again. A new message, unknown number. If you take the stand, we take everything. I reread that message. If you take the stand, we take everything, and felt a strange stillness wash over me. Not panic, not fear, just clarity. It was a line spoken from desperation, not strength. Because if they still thought they had something to take from me, they hadn't realized I'd already lost everything that used to matter. Home, family, trust. What was left was purpose, and that was something they couldn't buy or bulldoze, right? Still, I reported it. Dana and her federal contact traced the number burner phone dead end. No surprise, Lewis insisted we document everything. They're trying to rattle you, Eleanor, but this only adds weight to your case. He wasn't wrong. Each threat was proof of pressure, each pressure a crack in their armor. The committee hearing was held in a stone building 2 blocks from the Capitol. Ornate, freezing with a kind of silence that carried the echoes of centuries. Dana met me at the security gate, flanked by 2 federal marshals. They've increased protection. You'll be seated behind glass. I nodded. My knees ached, but I stood straight, walked tall. Inside, the room hummed with tension. Members of Congress sat in rows, faces unreadable. A row of cameras, court reporters. Brandon sat at the defense table, 3 attorneys on either side. He didn't look at me. Rachel wasn't there. But Carter was behind him, stone-faced eyes scanning everything like a hawk calculating exits. The lead committee chair, Representative Lisa Moreno, leaned into her mic. Ms. Eleanor Mason, thank you for your willingness to testify. Please begin. I cleared my throat. My hands didn't tremble. I was a registered nurse for 37 years. I raised a son alone. I paid for his schooling, co-signed his first business loan, and when I retired, I trusted him with the paperwork I no longer understood. And because I trusted him, I lost everything. But what hurts more than losing my home is knowing my name, my dignity was used to defraud others. I recounted it all. The forged signatures, the hidden accounts, the property deeds bearing my initials copied like a rubber stamp. I explained how Rachel had stolen access, how Carter's name tied to shell companies I never approved. When I described the moment I opened the safe and realized my own legal identity had been hijacked, the room fell silent. Not out of disbelief, but recognition. This wasn't just about me. I saw it in their faces, the acknowledgement that this could be their mother, their aunt, even themselves one day. Then came the twist. Elise, seated behind the media table, handed a sealed envelope to Dana. It was a late-arriving submission, a tip from a former intern of Brandon's who had requested anonymity. Inside, a transcript of a video conference between Carter, Brandon, and a third party listed only as Mr. G. Well, in it, Brandon had said, "If she flips, we move everything offshore. She'll be gone soon anyway. We just have to wait her out." A chill spread across the chamber. Representative Moreno held up the transcript. "Mr. Mason, is this your voice?" Brandon stood. Finally, he looked at me. I expected arrogance. I saw panic. I can't confirm," his attorney whispered. Brandon's hands trembled as he sat down. I kept my gaze on him even as a recess was called. I didn't flinch. This was the part he never expected me still here, still fighting. After the break, Dana introduced the digital forensics from Adriana metadata proof that Rachel had initiated the original scan of my ID and emailed it to Carter's offshore account. A subpoena had forced the ISP to confirm the IP location. It was sent from Brandon's office. With each layer peeled back, Brandon shrank. His voice cracked when questioned. "I didn't know how far it went," he muttered. "It was never supposed to hurt her." A snort escaped me before I could stop it. I didn't need to speak again. The evidence had already shouted loud enough. When I exited the hearing, there were reporters outside, flashbulbs, questions. A few shouted, "Mrs. Mason, do you feel vindicated?" I paused, I looked into the cameras, the cold January wind whipping at my scarf. No, I said. Vindication comes when the people who helped him hide stop pretending they didn't see. That night, back in the boarding house, Agnes poured me a glass of warm cider. You were magnificent, she whispered. I nodded, exhausted. My body ached. My soul strangely didn't. But just as I was ready to let myself sleep for the first time in weeks, my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I braced, but it wasn't a threat. It was a voicemail. This is Rachel. I think we both know Brandon wasn't the only one pulling strings. Meet me. I have something you'll want. Something that could finish this for good. It was a cloudy Thursday when I met Rachel again, of all places, in a botanical garden cafe tucked behind the U.S. National Arboretum. She picked it. Of course she did. Always the master of optics, Rachel knew how to frame herself. Quiet, soothing, a garden in winter. But I wasn't here to smell lavender. I was here to see the woman who'd forged my name like it was a menu signature and built her empire on my silence. She arrived in oversized sunglasses and a beige trench coat like she thought she was starring in a crime drama. No ring, no laptop, just a small leather satchel and lips pursed tight with guilt or calculation I couldn't tell. I'm not here to beg, she said before I could speak. And I'm not here to apologize. I stirred my tea unimpressed. Then, make this quick, I have court dates to prepare. Her hand trembled slightly as she pulled out a USB drive and slid it across the table. This has backups of everything. Email threads, call recordings, encrypted folders Carter thought were deleted. Offshore accounts, digital signatures, even voice memos Brandon left me. Bragging. I didn't touch the drive, why now? She leaned back exhausted in a way I hadn't seen since her wedding day. Because Carter's threatening me too now. And because Brandon, he was going to pin it all on me. Said it would be cleaner that way, said I was used to sacrifice. I nearly laughed. You were the sacrifice. You just didn't realize he sharpened the knife for you. For a moment we sat in silence, just two women who had each bet on the wrong man. She looked at me and whispered, "You were right. He was never yours. He was always his own." I took the drive. You still committed a crime, Rachel. You hurt me. You hurt people who trusted you. That doesn't get wiped away with a flash drive and a sad cafe meeting. I know, she nodded quietly. But maybe it counts for something that I finally stopped running. I didn't answer. Not with words. I stood, slid the meat drive into my purse, and walked away. That night, I handed the drive to Lewis and Dana. Within days, federal agents raided Carter's Miami office. The files Rachel gave us linked Skyward Holdings to 3 other laundering networks. Brandon's trust management firm dissolved overnight. Elise wrote the headline, "What they built with her name, she tore down with her voice." Brandon was arrested for conspiracy fraud and elder exploitation. Rachel testified. Carter tried to run, he was caught boarding a private plane in the Bahamas. And me, I bought back the apartment Brandon sold from under me. Not because I wanted to live in the past, but because I earned that view. I kept the floors scuffed and the kitchen the same yellow it always was. Harold visits every Friday. Agnes sends flowers. And when the AARP called again this time, I said yes. I now speak at forums across the country about financial abuse, about trusting our instincts, and how love-blind, stubborn, beautiful love can be the doorway we forget to lock. But I never remarried. I never rebuilt a new version of Brandon in my mind. I let him go the day I stood on that stage. Still some nights I wonder. Not about what he did, but about what I let slide. The small things, the red flags I called growing pains, the ways women mothers convince themselves to carry burdens quietly just to keep peace. Was I complicit in my own undoing? I leave that question open. As for Rachel, she pled guilty, struck a deal. Community service probation. Last I heard, she's working at a nonprofit helping elderly renters fight illegal evictions. I don't know if it's redemption, but I know what it feels like a start. And here's the part that might sting. After all this, after the courtrooms and the headlines and the apologies, I still miss the boy Brandon used to be. Or maybe the boy I imagined he was. We all build myths to survive. So here's my final question for you. The one I ask every audience, every podcast mic, every silent screen. If your child betrayed you to chase the American dream, would you protect them or expose them to save yourself? Let's see who's brave enough to answer. Story 2. I'm perched on the balcony of a weathered cabin, staring at pine trees that swallow the horizon. 6 months ago, I fled the life I built. Tomorrow, my ex Chloe will wake in a cramped apartment to a knock from the sheriff. Lucas will find his prized pickup gone. My children Leo and Mia will finally learn I am not blind. They tucked my secrets away like gifts. They thought they fooled me for 2 years. Now I will show them what happens when trust is broken beyond repair. I never pictured myself here. I used to wear steel-toed boots and a hard hat. I spent my days crawling under buildings saving clients from clogged lines and frozen valves. I hustled long hours so my family could live better than I did growing up. I believed in fair deals and firm handshakes. I believed my wife and brother shared those values. I believed my children were innocent. Each belief died the moment I discovered the conspiracy. At first, I blamed myself. At first, I doubted my instincts. By the end of that awful night, I resolved to reclaim my life no matter the cost. Detroit taught me how to fight back. I'm Ethan Rivera, 38 now, but once I was a skinny kid with scraped knees and 2 jobs by 15. My father drove a truck at night. My mother scrubbed office floors before dawn. Money vanished almost as soon as it arrived. Vacation meant sleeping in the car. By 16, I swept floors at a heating shop. Before I drove a dolly, I refilled coolant tanks and cleaned tools. I learned that respect had to be earned. I learned that loyalty demanded sacrifice. I learned every bolt and pipe was a promise. Each repair was a handshake you couldn't break. At 23, I passed my master technician exam. I borrowed $5,000 from my parents' modest savings and bought a single battered service van. Every spare hour, I chased new contracts and read manuals under a dim lamp. I hustled through snowstorms and summer heat. I answered phones at midnight and crawled on rooftops at dawn. By 28, I had 3 trucks, 10 employees, and a waiting list of clients. I poured every extra dollar into my reputation. I treated my staff like family. I taught them what my mentors taught me: integrity, grit, and pride in a job well done. I built something I thought nothing could shake. I met Chloe at a trade show in Seattle in 2018. She was 32, a sales rep for eco-friendly filters. Her bright eyes and quick wit drew me in. She asked smart questions about efficiency and safety. She laughed at my bad jokes. She challenged my ideas. We spent 2 days arguing over technical specs and coffee temperatures. By the end, I offered to drive her to dinner. We ate tacos under neon lights. She told me about her dreams of a calmer life. I told her about my empire in the making. We were perfect for each other, so I believed. 1 year later, we wed on a rainy June afternoon. I was proud to wear my best suit. She glowed in a simple ivory dress. Leo arrived 3 years later with my dark hair and her quick smile. Mia joined us in 2020, soft-spoken but fierce in her own way. Watching them grow gave me purpose beyond blueprints and invoices. I cut back to 50-hour weeks so I could teach them to fish and build snow forts. Chloe stayed home to guide their first words and steps. We looked like the portrait of success. Our revenue climbed past $2 million in 2021. We had built a tight crew and a trusted brand. That winter, my brother Lucas asked for a job. He was 34, restless after a string of failed ventures. I saw a chance to help family. He joined as operations manager. He signed contracts. He charmed clients. I handled design and service. He closed deals and I delivered. We celebrated every milestone together. Chloe toasted with champagne when we bought the 6-bedroom house. Everything felt perfectly aligned. Then odd things crept in. Tickets to luxury yoga workshops, new designer leggings, an extra truck billed to office expenses. Chloe insisted it was her self-care budget. Lucas said he wanted to surprise us with a performance bonus. Calls at odd hours, a borrowed phone to take urgent client messages. Leo flinched when I walked into Chloe's home office. Mia avoided dinner or scrolled away when I tried to talk. Our bills started spiking. Hundreds of dollars disappeared on equipment I never saw. I brushed it off as stress and growth. I refused to see betrayal until it burned. I told myself we were unbreakable. I told myself family always sticks together. I doubled my work hours to keep control. I trusted my gut, but I also ignored it. I blamed my exhaustion on deadlines, not deception. Every time I sensed danger, I forced positivity. I hosted weekend retreats and backyard barbecues. I bought lavish gifts. I stashed my doubts like expensive tools in a shed. I saw warnings in my children's eyes, but refused to act. I convinced myself it was stress, not betrayal. Then came that night in October. Late calls sparked by Lucas and Chloe. Muffled laughter in the hallway. A secret text meant to vanish. I found the proof in a hidden folder on Chloe's tablet. My heart froze. My hands shook. I blinked against betrayal so deep it hurt more than physical pain. In that moment, I understood everything. I packed my desk at dawn, left a note on the fridge, "I'm done and you'll never see me again," and drove until the road blurred my tears. I didn't leave out of spite. I left because I refused to be a fool. This was the price of my faith. This was the pivot point. When the sunrise brushed the pines with amber light, I wasn't the same man who'd slammed the door behind him that cold October dawn. I was sharper now, like a blade honed to a single purpose. I spent weeks parked on the edge of nowhere, mapping every twist of the road to my old life. I studied Chloe's patterns, Lucas's habits, the rhythm of my children's days. I listened to whispered rumors at a dusty gas station in Montana, where a retired detective named Maya Patel pointed me toward a hacker known only as Finch, a slender woman with bright blue hair and a talent for unearthing secrets. Finch didn't move without a plan. She insisted I prove my resolve. Over 3 icy nights in a cabin wired to her laptops, I bled out every detail: bank records, office memos, Chloe's hidden credit cards, Lucas's offshore shell companies. Each file I handed her tightened the noose I planned to slip around their necks. Finch introduced me to Malik Navarro, a former accountant who'd turned whistleblower when he discovered his own firm laundering money for a shadowy syndicate. He owed me nothing, but with my connections, I offered him a deal protection in exchange for cleaning the numbers that would expose Lucas's embezzlement. Malik smiled like he hadn't dared hope for a second chance. He disappeared into my old office computers, erasing incriminating emails, forging false audit trails, and planting breadcrumbs for authorities to follow. Meanwhile, Finch dug deeper, tapping into Chloe's encrypted messages with her yoga instructor and a masked identity she used to funnel money overseas. With each revelation, my purpose solidified. I wasn't here for revenge alone. I was here to deliver justice. As the days shortened, I recruited Serena Vogel, an investigative journalist whose exposé on corporate corruption had made her a target in Chicago. She agreed to write the story only when I showed her the damning evidence Malik and Finch uncovered. Her steady voice and piercing questions would frame the narrative, make audiences see my family's betrayal, not as a private feud, but as a cautionary tale about power and trust. Serena's presence reminded me of my mother's fierce kindness. She coaxed my story out of me, demanded clarity, forced me to refine my motives until they shone with purpose rather than bitterness. Next, I reached out to Diego Cortez, a union organizer I'd helped when he fought for better wages at the heating shop where I'd swept floors as a teenager. He still carried his old welding helmet and a hunger for justice. His crew, mechanics, roofers, electricians, all owed me favors. Diego assembled a team to stand at my side when the moment came, muscle to scare off any hired goons Lucas might send witnesses to ensure no one could silence the truth. Each ally filled a gap I couldn't have addressed alone. Night after night, I patched together our plan. Serena's article would go live the same morning the sheriff served Chloe with charges. Finch would livestream the evidence dump so no court clerk could bury the files. Malik's forged audit would force Lucas's bank to freeze assets and alert federal investigators. Diego's team would secure the house, preventing any last-minute destruction of files or intimidation of witnesses. I traced every step back to the moment Chloe first concealed her second phone. I replayed her laughter when she told Lucas Dad's so tired he won't notice. My children's eyes at Christmas, wide with excitement, unaware they were pawns. Those memories fueled my resolve better than any hate. Yet in those long hours, doubt crept in. Was I dragging my children into a war they never asked for? Could I expose Chloe without shattering everything they knew about family? Serena listened as I wrestled with these ghosts. She reminded me that truth once hidden corrodes from within. Better they felt pain now than a lifetime in a house built on lies. Diego's quiet nods confirmed we weren't bloodthirsty. We were guardians of a broken promise. One pre-dawn drive brought me back to the edge of our old neighborhood. I watched through binoculars as Lucas polished the chrome on his pickup, oblivious to the trap being set. I pictured Leo and Mia waking up not to a knock at our front door, but to the knowledge that their father had fought for them. I felt the old pride in every bolt of the pickup, every threaded pipe of my past now repurposed into a fortress of truth. By the time the sun crested the horizon, our pieces were in place. Finch's server hummed with live feeds. Malik sent the final forensic spreadsheets. Serena's article glowed on her tablet, scheduled to publish at 8 a.m. Diego's men gathered in the shadows of the porch. I slid from the driver's seat, my reflection in the pickup's window, a man remade by betrayal and purpose. I checked my watch, 7:07 a.m. The countdown had begun. When the clock ticked 8, I felt the wind shift through the pines that guard my past, as if the forest itself bore witness to what was unfolding, and I sat in the cab of my truck parked across from our old home, watching Sheriff Ramirez tread onto the porch with measured steps, while Chloe rose from the couch, clutching her yoga mat like a last shield she knew she couldn't raise. Finch's server hummed in my ear through the earpiece, its pale glow dancing across the dash as Serena's exposé loaded line by line on her tablet beside me. Lucas Oblivious polished the chrome on his pickup with a ragged cloth he still believed in surprises. Ramirez paused, lifted the arrest warrant at eye level, and Chloe froze mid-breath, her defenses collapsing under the weight of that single sheet of paper. She reached instinctively for the mat, then let it drop as if it burned her fingertips. Lucas spun at the siren cry of Finch's live feed cutting through his frantic phone call, and I watched hidden transactions and shell company transfers flicker across the screen, like spilled ink on white linen, each entry exposing the betrayal that had metastasized beneath our roof. My knuckles whitened on the steering wheel as Leo and Mia crept to the window, their small faces pressed to the glass eyes wide with fear and confusion. A silent thunder rolled through me, then knowing I had unleashed a tempest they would never forget. From the shadows around the porch, Diego's team emerged, two silent sentinels whose presence meant no hired thug could breach our circle. Behind them stood Malik, arms folded, the final audit spreadsheet still readable on Finch's handheld device. Serena's voice sliced through the tension as she cleared her throat and read the headline I had lived to see published: "The Fall of a Family Empire When Trust Becomes a Weapon." Finch's code had slipped past every clerk's desk, ensuring these files would be stamped into public record forever. Ramirez guided Chloe gently toward the patrol car, her tears carving quiet tracks down her cheeks, while Mia clutched a ragged fox toy, and Leo lingered at the doorframe, caught between hope and heartbreak. Lucas collapsed onto the doorstep, face buried in his hands, the rag slipping from his grip as if surrendering. I exhaled, stepped from the truck, and inhaled the sharp scent of pine and frost, remarkable reminders of every hardship my parents endured at dawn and dusk. I walked toward the house with the calm certainty of a man who'd pieced his world back together, from ruin my heart, a steady drum of resolve. Finch and Malik fell in beside Diego, Serena holding her tablet up like a banner. We formed a silent line of justice that no family bond could dismantle. Chloe's eyes met mine through the haze of her tears, and I saw regret deeper than any canyon I had ever crossed. Lucas lifted his head, regret shimmering in his dark gaze. I glanced down at Leo and Mia, their young shoulders squared in unspoken solidarity, and realized the price of truth would echo in their memories far longer than any lie ever did. My voice broke the hush like the first crack of dawn. It ends here. Above us, a hawk cried its call, sharp as a promise. In the days to come, the neighborhood would murmur about the morning. Our family's castle of lies crumbled under its own weight. But here amid the ruins, I stood unbowed. The storm had passed, and only raw earth remained beneath my boots, reminding me that from devastation, new life can spring. In the days that followed the collapse, the pines whispered secrets older than our pain, and I found myself walking a narrow ridge between justice and forgiveness. Each morning I rose before dawn so I could watch mist lift like grief from the fields and remind myself that healing begins when we face the cold light. The sheriff's station became my second home as I signed affidavits and offered testimony that pieced together the patterns of betrayal. Ramirez met me in the coffee room and shared quiet solidarity as he passed me a steaming mug and spoke of his own lost brother. His voice was low and honest and taught me that mercy does not betray truth but can soften its hardest edges. In court, I watched Chloe stand in handcuffs and bear the weight of her shame with a dignity she once reserved for dinner parties. Lucas sat beside her in a tailored suit borrowed from the evidence room and refused to meet my gaze. I felt a stab of sorrow sharper than any anger as I realized how far we had all fallen. After hearings, I would drive my children to school through empty fields and force myself to speak of normal things. Leo asked about a math test, and Mia wondered if we could adopt another dog. Their simple questions reminded me that innocence carries its own wisdom. I watched their small faces and felt a sorrow strong enough to reshape my purpose. At home, I turned Chloe's old office into a study for Leo and Mia, filling shelves with their favorite books and leaving a space open for new beginnings. Each night, I lit candles on the porch and read them stories about heroes who endured loss and found strength in wounded hearts. Their eyes would grow heavy with sleep, and I would close the book with the soft satisfaction of a promise kept. Friends from the union brought meals and laughter and reminded us that community can rebuild what betrayal destroys. Diego arrived one afternoon with his wife and 3 kids and set up a backyard movie projector so we could watch old comedies under the stars. We laughed together until our sides ached, and I felt the tension in my chest ease as if released by shared amusement. Serena's article continued to circulate, stirring debates about family loyalty and corporate greed. I read comments from strangers who thanked me for my courage and from others who questioned my motives. Each reaction was a mirror reflecting back the complexity of truth. Finch sent coded updates about the case's progress and reminded me that justice moves at its own pace like a glacier carving stone. Malik worked behind the scenes to ensure the financial web unraveled without harming innocent employees. He once messaged me at midnight to say he had found an old ledger showing how far Chloe's funds had traveled. His dedication felt like a gift you do not expect and seldom repay. Leo struggled with word choice at school when a classmate asked why his mother was in trouble. Mia pressed her face against my sleeve and whispered that she missed bedtime hugs from her mother. I held them close and promised them that love can survive even the deepest betrayals. I began talking to a counselor whose calm voice guided me through my own anger and fear. She taught me that forgiving Chloe did not mean forgetting her actions, but releasing their hold over my spirit. In her office, I learned that guilt can be a bridge to understanding when approached with kindness. One evening, I found a letter Chloe had written, before her arrest tucked under the windshield wiper of my truck. Her handwriting trembled with regret and hope, and spoke of a wish to mend what she had broken. Reading those words felt like finding an ember of warmth in winter's grip. I carried the letter inside and placed it in a cedar box alongside my father's tools and my mother's apron. It felt right to honor both the pain and the love that shaped my life. Months passed, and the legal case wound its way through hearings and mediation. Chloe agreed to restitution payments and a structured visitation plan for Leo and Mia. Lucas faced federal charges and began cooperating with investigators to save what dignity he had left. I watched each hearing from the front row bench, feeling the weight of history in every legal word. At home, I planted a small garden in the backyard, choosing heirloom seeds to symbolize the possibility of growth from broken soil. Each seed I pressed into moist earth felt like a silent vow that life endures. As green shoots emerged, I taught Leo and Mia to water them gently and watch them with patient hope. They learned that healing is an act of daily kindness rather than a single event. One afternoon, Mia asked if I still loved Chloe. I knelt beside her in the garden and held her hands. I told her that love can look different after betrayal and that forgiving does not erase what happened. It simply frees us to choose our future. Leo built a tiny fence around the tomato plants and named each post after a family memory. When he finished, he stepped back and smiled as if he had repaired more than wood. Standing there, I felt the promise of something new taking root beneath the pines. The world beyond our yard still whispered doubts and judgments, but here in soil turned by our own hands, I sensed hope growing. In a few days, we planned to host a small gathering so Chloe could be with us under the sun and face the children with an honest heart. I feared tears and tension, but also dreamed of redemption blooming in unexpected places. As I closed my eyes that night, I pictured the garden alive with laughter and forgiveness. The forest around the cabin stood silent and still as if holding its breath. Sunlight curved around the pines as if the forest itself exhaled hope into the morning air. By the time Chloe's battered Subaru rattled up the drive, I stood at the edge of our little garden where tomato vines clung to their stakes like survivors of a long battle. Leo and Mia hovered behind me, their small shapes carved in the soft gold of dawn, and for a moment I felt the ancient pulse of the earth steady my racing heart. Chloe stepped out, her shoulders tight as if she still carried handcuffs in their weight, and when our eyes met, she offered a shaky nod instead of the warm smile she once practiced in photos. No music played, no words tumbled from her lips. Instead, we all inhaled the hush of soil and sky, the kind of silence that only the woods know before a storm breaks. I held out a fist and Leo bumped knuckles with me, then timidly reached for his mother's hand. Mia stayed close to Chloe's side, clutching the fox toy from Part 3 as if it contained all the magic she still believed in. I gestured toward the stakes of heirloom tomatoes heavy with green fruit. "Help me untie these," I said, voice low enough that only Chloe could hear. She slid forward, fingers trembling, and together we freed the vines. Each twist of the tie felt like undoing the knots of our past. Chloe's breath came faster with every snip, and when she released the final vine, she let her hand linger on my shoulder, tentative seeking. Behind us, Diego and Serena watched from the porch steps, their faces calm but alert guardians of the fragile truce we had summoned. We moved into the yard in a loose circle, Chloe with her knees bent to plant new marigold seedlings, me kneeling beside her. Guiding her fingers deeper into the warm earth, Leo lining up smooth stones to border the garden bed, Mia scattering wildflower seeds like blessings. No one spoke of courtrooms or jail cells or lawsuits. Instead, we spoke of rain forecasts and how to protect tender shoots from late frost. Chloe pointed out a patch of soil that slumped and confessed that she'd been too afraid to tend to it alone, and in that moment, I heard the crack in her armor. I nodded and said, "We'll fix it together." The words floated soft between the pines. Later, we gathered around a makeshift table of 2 old doors set on sawhorses. Diego's crew had brought fresh bread, Serena had prepared a salad from root vegetables she'd foraged on her weekend trip, and Malik appeared with carafes of sweet tea he'd brewed from his grandmother's recipe. We passed dishes in a quiet line of reconciliation, each plate a small peace offering. Chloe placed her hand on the table, her knuckles white, and offered a blessing she'd composed in her own voice. To honesty, to sorrow that leads to healing, and to love that learns to forgive. Mia sniffled and wiped her nose on her sleeve, and Leo looked surprised that his mother could still sound brave under the weight of consequences. Between bites, Chloe told a story I'd never heard, how she first met Lucas after my back was turned at a company holiday party, how the thrill of secrecy had felt like a rush she'd mistaken for freedom, and how guilt had grown in her chest until it crowded out every other feeling. Her voice cracked over the last lines, but she held it together long enough to say she was sorry more times in that moment than she had in all the silence that followed her arrest. I watched Leo's eyes flicker, and then Mia reached across the table and squeezed her mother's hand. It was a small gesture, but it carried more weight than any courtroom verdict. After lunch, the children ran to the tire swing at the far end of the yard while Chloe and I lingered by the screen door. I took her hands and felt their tremble. "You don't have to earn forgiveness overnight," I said. "Just keep showing up." She nodded, her tears glinting like dew on spider webs. In the distance, a raven cawed, its voice a stark reminder that life and death, betrayal and trust always walk hand in hand. I led her to a young oak sapling we'd planted last week and handed her a ribbon of green cloth. "Tie this here," I said, "for new beginnings." She wrapped the ribbon tight, and the ribbon fluttered in the breeze like a promise. As the sun dipped low, Serena snapped a photo of our patchwork family under the golden light, her camera catching Lucas in the background, offering a thumbs up to Diego's youngest daughter. None of us knew what tomorrow might bring: new challenges and court questions from neighbors, the slow work of rebuilding a fractured name, but in that fleeting glow, we tasted the truth that healing is 1,000 small acts stitched together by hands willing to hurt so they can heal. I gathered Chloe and the children in a loose embrace, arms circling soil and sorrow alike, and felt the pulse of the pines echo in my chest, steadfast, ancient, unafraid of storms. The forest around us exhaled again as dusk settled, and I understood that even the deepest wounds can sprout new life when tended with honesty and hope. Morning light filtered through the pines as I stepped onto the porch and felt the cool breeze carry the scent of fresh earth and possibility. Leo and Mia chased each other around the garden's edge, laughing as they flung handfuls of wildflower petals into the air. Chloe stood by the oak sapling we'd tied with its green ribbon, her hands folded in front of her like an offering. I watched them move, so alive, so unguarded, and realized that healing is not a finish line, but a path that unfolds with each choice we make. We spent the morning untangling old ropes of habit. Over coffee at the reclaimed lumber table, Chloe and I sketched a plan to reopen the heating shop under a new name. Rivera and Company Integrity and Transparency would be our cornerstone. Diego offered his garage as a temporary workspace. Malik agreed to manage finances, ensuring every transaction would be above board. Serena promised to document our journey in her next column, not as a sensational exposé, but as a guide to rebuilding trust. Even Lucas, from a distance, sent a note expressing remorse and asking how he might help the children without disrupting our fragile rhythm. I replied that forgiveness is a garden that needs tending, and that perhaps one day he could visit when the vines of trust grew strong enough to support him. By midday, we walked the trails behind the cabin, the children trailing sticks and stones like gifts. I told them stories of my father teaching me to drive nails straight, and of my mother's hands smoothing rough edges of wood. I asked Leo what honesty looked like to him now. He said it felt like the sun after a storm. Mia said it felt like her mother's voice when she finally said, "I'm sorry." Their words rippled through me and reminded me that truth can hurt, but it also lights the way forward. Back at the shop's old driveway, we cleared out rusted tools and swept decades of dust into piles. Diego's crew arrived with power washers and fresh paint. Chloe laid out safety protocols on a clipboard, her confidence blooming as she guided the volunteers. I tightened bolts on a service van that would bear our new logo, a rising sun framed by pines. As I stepped back to admire our work, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The shop had always been my fortress. Now it would be our shared place of purpose. That evening, we invited neighbors for a ribbon-cutting ceremony beside the oak sapling. Leo handed out homemade lemonade, and Mia pinned fresh marigolds to everyone's shirts. Chloe stood beside me, her hand resting on my arm, and I looked into her eyes and saw not just guilt, but resolve and a spark of the woman I first fell in love with. When I sliced the ribbon, the scissors glinted under the lantern strung between the pines, and a hush fell over the crowd before applause broke like rain. In that moment, I understood that forgiveness and justice can coexist, that love can survive the deepest cleavages when nourished by honesty and compassion. Later, as dusk settled, I tucked Leo and Mia into bed and whispered that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but also new chances. I stepped outside once more, the oak's ribbon fluttering against the darkening sky. A lone hawk traced a circle above the treetops, its cry echoing like a benediction. I closed my eyes and breathed in the forest's steady pulse. The path ahead was neither straight nor smooth, but it lay open before us, rooted in truth, guided by hope, and carried forward by hands willing to rebuild what was broken. In that sacred silence, I felt our fractured bonds knitting into something stronger, ready to face whatever storms might come together.